Fish Night. And bizarrely, I just remembered one thing today. The first one was in 2013. And we had a video message from Rashid, our very first Fish Night event. And now here he is in person. It took us 5 years to bring him in. Yeah, well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us in this very important, very topical issue on subsidies. And I believe there are a number of reasons why subsidies are very important, particularly in the blue, on the ocean fisheries space in particular. We are expected to eliminate all harmful subsidies by 2020, according to the Sustainable Development Goals. So wish us luck. Hope luck everyone here.
How many months?
Exactly. So that brings it to urgency, of course, and there's a lot of discussion going on in WTO negotiations as well. There are multiple reasons why subsidies, particularly with respect to fisheries, are extremely important, highly topical issues that need to be discussed. And we have with us today a global authority on this particular topic, Professor Rashid Sumaila, who's kindly agreed to come and share with us his insights on this very topic. So I'm sure he doesn't need any introduction, but just briefly to say that Rashid is a professor and director of the Fisheries Economics Research Unit at the University of British Columbia Fisheries Center. He specializes in bioeconomics, marine ecosystem valuation, and the analysis of global issues such as fisheries, subsidies, IUU, the economics of high seas and deep seas fisheries, and he's given a number of talks, more than one can count, in multiple forums and platforms internationally as well. So I don't need to say much about Rashid because most of you obviously know about Rashid. I guess what excites me about Rashid's approach is his very pragmatic approach, in a sense. He doesn't necessarily have that militant view in saying subsidies are always bad, they're always good and bad subsidies. But the issue is how do we enable that transition from the bad to the subsidies? And how can we make subsidies work both for the ecosystem, in this particular case fisheries, but also for the people as well, looking at the equitable distribution of benefits and so on and so forth. So all these issues that we're going to discuss tonight, luckily we have Rashid here with us, and we'll have a presentation for about 20 minutes from Rashid, and then we'll have two discussants sharing with us their views and their reaction to the presentation, and then we will open it up for Q&A. And finally, we'll go upstairs for some refreshment and networking as well. Before I invite Rashid to start his talk, I am obliged to read out a housekeeping regulation here. Sorry, I'm slightly dyslexic. I always admit this every single year. But disabled toilets are located in the Cafe Club on the ground floor up. And men's are upstairs between the ground and the first floor. And women's are nearest up the first half flight of stairs outside the room. There are no planned fire alarm tests. So if you hear a continuous alarm, please ensure you evacuate via the fire exit to the assembly point on Portco Lane, opposite IIED building. And the fire exit is on my left. And Rosamund has left a note here saying, as I'm to point to the door, trying not to look like an air steward. How are they? Well, good. And we, as you may have noticed as well, we have colleagues, including Matt here and Zayza, taking pictures tonight. So if you don't want your photos to be taken, please make yourselves known to Matt and Zayza. Great. And for those who are keen to tweet, which we do encourage you to all tweet, and the hashtag is FishNight5, one word, FishNight5. So without further ado, now let me invite Rashid to carry on this presentation, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks for the introduction and your last part of the show here, telling us why things are. It reminds me anytime I come to London, right? And an elevator, a lift, and then they tell you, the doors are closing, the doors are open, mind the gap. I said, do I really need to know this? No. So it's cool, right? Yeah. So we're going to talk about subsidies, and I have 20 minutes because really, I think the best part is when we go into the Q&A and we do back and forth. That's all. So this is just to drop a few things to get us started, and then we will move on. So this is a framework that I've been showing recently, and it's not only about subsidies. I think this is probably one way to think about our relationship with nature, people and nature, and the environment, including the ocean. You know, at the end you have ocean conservation, we want ocean sustainability because we all know the benefits we get from the ocean, there are a lot, and we don't want these benefits, most of us at least, don't want these benefits to end with us, right? We want future generations to also continue enjoying these benefits. So there is that, and then there's people now and people in the future, and a number of us are concerned about the distribution of the benefits from the ocean. We want some fairness. So when we take actions or we develop policies like subsidies policy, I think it's good to have these two things in mind, such that whatever we do in terms of policy and actions, we try to ensure that there is a positive feedback between people and nature. You know, rather than developing a negative feedback which just takes everything down. You know, and I'll explain that as we go into subsidies more. The way you design your subsidies policy and implement it can actually lead to a positive feedback, or it can lead to a negative feedback. You don't want that. So, and I thought, I mean, this is a public talk. Before I get into the subsidies, quickly tell you again what most of you know already about how important the ocean is to people, right? And that is, as you know, it helps in terms of the environment, balancing the environment. And when I went to Vancouver, one of the surprises I got is how mild the temperature was actually. I thought I was going to the north and I was going to be minus 40 degrees in the summer, in the winter, and then it's plus 6 degrees. So I asked people in Vancouver, how much are you willing to pay for this moderation of the winter? Huh? You want to be in Winnipeg or in Vancouver? That's why the ocean, because we have the Pacific Ocean. Very important. Food is fish. A lot of us eat fish, and that is a very important source of animal protein. We take about 100 million tons of fish each year out of the ocean. You know, that's a lot of massive food coming out of that. Some of you have heard me say this before. To really realize how big this is, if you change the weight into number of mature cows, that gives you 100 million mature cows that we pull out of the ocean each year. Just imagine that. If this was really fish cows we were pulling, people might start demonstrating, right? Because there are little pieces we don't really realize. That's a lot of food. It's a lot of income and jobs for people. And actually it also means we have to watch what we're doing because the ecosystem may not, as we have seen, be able to sustain this massive takeoff. So there's a lot there, and then there are the jobs and the livelihoods and incomes. Don't have time. This figure I like a lot. We looked at the number of people that earn income from marine fisheries, and we came up with an estimate of about 260 million people around the world earn some income. And when you dig into the data, most of the jobs are in large developing countries, okay? Look at that, including Nigeria there, right, in Africa, but these are big countries. And to me, this is the biggest service the oceans gives to us, because it keeps young people, especially young men, in these countries busy. Without a fish, they will have nothing to do. Can you imagine the headache? You know, I had a chance of talking in 2016, 2 hours after Obama had given a talk. And I said, you know, you remember when he became president, how many of us were surprised how quickly Mr. Obama became gray. You remember that? He became old like this. And I said, if not for these jobs, he would have been grayer. And not only him, all of us here would have been grayer. Somebody came later and said, you will never get gray. They don't see it, right? So this is really crucial, and that's part of the reason we are all concerned. You know. But we also know there are lots of problems, from overfishing, fishing down, pollution, climate change, you name it. So that's why we're doing all that we're doing to try to sustain this. And so this takes me into subsidies, and this is a quick definition. Essentially, it's your tax money or government resources being passed on to a sector, in this case, the fisheries sector. And this can be direct or indirect. The thing is, it gives that sector an advantage relative to the rest of the economy, and that can drive decisions, right? People react to economics, and that is part of the reason we don't quite like it. This is our basic model, just to illustrate what happens. So I don't know how many people have not seen this model before in this room. Yeah, so that's quite, yeah. So this is our basic bioeconomic model of the fishery. So this thing combines both the ecology and the economics in one figure. And that curve actually, first of all, comes from the fish, the growth of the fish. So this is the nice point, right? If you are here, no fish means nothing you can do, right? Without fish, if this was biomass, zero biomass means you can come there 1,000 years, there will still be no fish. That's the best part of the model, I think. So that's the most resilient part of the model, not sustainable, zero fish. But as soon as you have some fish, there will be some growth, and we turn this into money. And then, so this is total revenue you get, and this is a simple representation of the cost of fishing. So it costs you X dollars to take out a boat and all the people, and if you take more boats, you pay more. So that's a very simple economic model. And people keep fishing until they eat here. When there's no money to be made, then you stop if you're thinking economically, right? Except if you have subsidies, like in that place. Then you can fish more because somebody is paying part of your cost. And you are seeing more profit than you would see without a subsidy. So that's why we say E3 to E4 is the extra capacity that comes in just because you get free money coming in. So in theory, this is the main reason why many of us are not happy with subsidies, many of the subsidies, because they lead to this kind of thing. All right? Bit of basic theory. So in 2000, around 2000, we started working on this, trying to classify, because the world was beginning to be worried about this. The WTO was given a mandate in 2001 to actually deal with this, because not only because of the trade and distributional issues, but because of conservation concerns. Yeah. So we started building, and we put up the definitions and started building a global database. And so this is the kind of thing we say. Not all subsidies are not necessarily bad. They can be good subsidies. They can be beneficial, harmful, or ambiguous, like as Isan said in the beginning. And actually in the beginning we called this the good, the bad, and the ugly. And actually this was my student who was here a few months ago, Ahmed Khan. When he started with me, we wanted to do a West African subsidy, and said, let's do global, because that will make it more interesting. And he came to my office and said, let's call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. I said, get out of my office. We are not making a movie. And he persisted, and we did that, actually. Many people liked it. So yeah. And then we created the database, and we've been updating this database. Our latest figures is 2009, but we are updating as I'm speaking now, our group. And then we build onto this. All along it's been about the environmental negative effects of subsidies. But this work, which was done by my PhD student, Anna Shoba, part of her thesis, we decided to look at the distributional aspect of subsidies. So before now we had national numbers. So you had the UK gives X million dollars of subsidies to the fisheries sector, and we do that for all maritime countries. So this thing takes the national number and says how much of that goes to small scale versus large scale fisheries. And this is a simple methodology. We ran that through and came back with really amazing, surprising numbers, even for me. I always knew most of the money goes to the big, until we did the study. And these are some of the numbers I'm going to give you. At the moment, we estimate about $35 billion of government taxpayer money going to the sector, and about 57% of them are considered to be harmful of that. They encourage more fishing effort than overfishing. And a lot of them given by countries that have the money. So it's a rich country, it's a developed world. So that gives you a very quick summary of the big report. So you have about 10 billion good subsidies, like subsidies that help you to manage your fisheries well, like monitoring and control, stopping people from doing illegal fishing, for example, or using dynamite to fish. All that kind of thing will be good. The fuel subsidies will be bad, and ambiguous are those you cannot easily classify. So that's the 35 billion, which is about 30 to 40% of the gross revenues of the sector globally. Huge amount. Think of yourself running a business and somebody's throwing 40% of your gross revenue at you, man. That would be good, eh? For fish, it's not good. And this is the headline figure for the large scale versus small scale. And so that's 30 billion. When we did detailed analysis, we came up with nearly 30 billion of the 35 went to large scale, big boats, industrial fisheries around the world, and less than 6 billion went to the small scale. This is huge. So on top of the environmental issues, now we have layered an equity dimension, which is, and this, I was motivated to do this actually here in London. I gave a talk at the British House of Lords to G20 governing people, the G20 group of countries. And I talked about subsidies. The Speaker of the House of Assembly in Indonesia was in the room. He went after me like crazy. They said, Rashid, we will continue to give subsidies. I said, why, sir? Why would you do that? He said, we want to help the poor. We want to help the small scale. Then I knew they are not help, it's not, but I didn't have data to counter him. So we had back and forth, and then that motivated this. And this is what we find. So 84% goes to large scale now. When you look into what goes to each of these sectors, about 40–41% of that goes to small scale are considered harmful, whilst in the case of large scale, 60%. So not only do they take the bulk of it, which has consequences, it makes the small scale fishes less viable and competitive both on the water and in the market, but these guys also do more harm. Just think of a big trawler. They need a lot of fuel, so fuel is the largest out of the 35 billion, it's the largest single type, and so it shows up this way. Right? So this equity dimension is making, I was at the WTO, and people really love this because it gives them another reason to work to divert at least the bad to the good. And so here you can do a lot of things with these numbers. This is just one example. We calculated fish worker in the developing world versus fish worker in the developed world, how much they get per person. And for every dollar a developing country fisher gets, the developed one gets $7. So I was at the African Union, I say, you guys should be on top of the roof shouting to take out this because you are the most disadvantaged. You can't compete on the water. West Africans know this, and you can't compete in the market. So that's one thing you can pull out of our database. So I'm back here thinking hard, not only subsidies, how to design policies and take actions that will help people, and that will help people, and then people can take better care of the ocean, and that comes back and helps people more because you have a better system. More fish, everything be equal, more fish is more food. We want to do that rather than go negative, where all the money goes to the big guys, and they are harmful, and so they impact the environment, they disadvantage the small scale in the marketplace and so on. You don't want to do that. And dimensions of this work, which we're doing with your group here, is to look at this. We've done between nations, we look at subsidies, and we are beginning to look within nations, small scale, large scale, and other aspects we will look within nations, between groups, gender aspects we'll bring in. So in the next iteration we might come up, how much of these subsidies goes to women versus men? And that will be another big skewed thing, I suspect. Indigenous people, if you're in Canada or other parts of the world, it's important. And then between generations, it's not only about us, it's about our daughters and grandsons and so on. So that is that. What I'll do now, and I haven't seen you tell me 5 minutes, which is almost perfect. What I'll do as a way of summary is to play this interview which I gave to CBC on September the 8th, because I think it kind of summarizes and it will open the gate for Q&A, I believe, in the night. So we'll see what you guys think. All right. It's audio.
Yes, I'm just looking for
All
it.
right.
On the right, Ross.
On the right, on the left.
How do countries manage the seas while still meeting the needs of people? That is one of the big questions Rashid Sumaila struggles with in his work. He's a professor of Fisheries Economics and Management at the University of British Columbia, and he's in town to speak at Memorial University. According to Sumaila, the answer to protecting the environment and meeting human needs involves major changes in policy.
That's really tough, I mean, and so it's ideas that policies we put out and the actions we take can either give positive feedback from people to nature and nature to people, or we may end up with a negative feedback. And so in designing these policies, we really have to have this in mind, such that we make sure we put in place policies and management systems that lead to positive feedback, where people get benefits, and that leads to them thinking more about the conservation and trying to conserve. And because you conserve more, you get more benefits, and so on and so forth. Rather than the opposite, where people are in dire need, where the few people run off with all the benefits and leave the bulk of the people, which means that you have to hang on the last fish, right, if you need food. And that then leads to a negative feedback to nature.
So how do you get people, though, to adopt a conservationist attitude when they are struggling financially in communities all over coastal Canada to survive? How do you get people to weigh the benefits of protecting the environment?
Yeah, and this question really hits at the struggle and the effort that I and others are placing. For example, let's take fisheries subsidies. Is an instrument that our governments use, both in Canada and around the world, to somehow support the community or the fishing sector for all sorts of reasons. It can be social and other reasons. But the way you do that can lead to increasing poverty and need, which is partly why we are where we are now. And therefore, like your question is alluding to, therefore there's pressure to take the fish. And so the way we design the subsidy, why am I saying this? When we analyze the amount of subsidies being given by governments around the world, we came up with an estimate of $35 billion a year that governments around the world give to the fishing sector. Now, when we look at the distribution of that between large-scale industrial and small-scale fisheries, 84% of our estimated $35 billion goes to large-scale fisheries. Only about 16% goes to small-scale. And there are more small-scale fishers in the world by far than large-scale fishers. And they are those who are really at the coast and scratching for survival, right? And then we use our policy to aggravate this problem, because it makes them less viable, less competitive in the market and in catching the fish. And so that is the kind of negative feedback I'm talking about, and trying to alert them so we avoid them.
So going forward, what are your suggestions?
So number one, if we continue on the subsidies trend, number one is that the way we should in our giving of subsidies, and I'm not saying don't get money into the communities, there are also some ways, but when we do that, number one, we give them what we call so-called good subsidies, subsidies that don't lead to overfishing and overcapacity. So subsidies, for example, the Europeans have this idea, which I think is neat. They say we pay coastal fishing communities to catch plastic rather than catch fish.
Huh?
Yeah. So here you use the taxpayers' money to support cleaner environment. And so we have a win-win-win. These are the kind of clever ways we can actually get to help people and also keep nature sustainable.
And that was Rashid Sumaila, a professor of Fishery Economics and Management at the University of British Columbia. He is speaking at the Bruneau Center this evening,
Not this
7:30 to 9.
This really is here. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Please, you may sit down. If you don't mind me, I will be standing up. I feel more in control when I'm standing up.
Yeah, okay. Take charge.
Good. Yeah, thank you so very much, Rashid. I think it's really, you've given us a very nice snapshot of the current state of the gravity of fishery subsidies, if you like. Essentially, it's all about the taxpayers' money that goes to fishers to make an activity that would not make any economic sense to make financial economic sense. And someone challenged me once, I remember, saying, can you give me an example using simple language? And I said, would it make any economic sense to go out there, clear the forest, just to catch a rabbit? It wouldn't, right? But sometimes the government is there to give me subsidy to enable that to become financially viable activity. And it's almost like a comparison, if you like, it's essentially you going out there to conduct an economic activity that wouldn't make any financial sense, but you're being supported through subsidies to be able to do that, which, of course, I put so much stress on the environment, on fisheries, and obviously eventually on people's lives. So thank you so very much, Rashid. And I also failed, with his apologies, to mention that Rashid is the winner of the Volvo Environment Prize of 2017. How wonderful is that?
Oh gosh, yeah. It was shocking actually when they called me.
That's very well deserved, Rashid, to say the least. Very well deserved. So, no, thank you so very much. So, just before we open up for Q&A, I was going to invite Yemi, just back there. Yemi is you're leading the Developing World Fisheries within the Marine Stewardship Council the last time I saw you.
Yeah.
So please, Yemi, if you can quickly sort of give us your reaction and also if you can open the question as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Esam, and thank you very much.
Do you mind coming to the front?
Oh, sure.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Sorry, Esam, is that
That's
okay?
You're on camera, you know.
Yes. No, yeah. Not that I want to be in control of anything. Well, thank you very much for that very interesting and insightful presentation. I guess maybe from my end, in terms of maybe initial responses and comments, is to say there's clearly no question about the harmful effects of subsidies. Where the challenge is in terms of how do we operationalize some kind of solutions. And I think part of not being able to get to those solutions, although there are a whole lots of other reasons, but part of it is also not having enough data to classify these subsidies or provide the context of those subsidies as we're talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So people and governments actually know which subsidies to remove or address. So it's really great to see that research, for example, looking at the inequity between developed regions and developing regions, and not just regions, but also scale, so small scale versus large scale. And I guess maybe one initial question I have is, while it's true that there is an inequity in the allocation of subsidies, it's also true, especially across developed versus developing countries, it's also true that FAO in a report this year, Sophia report, State of Fisheries and Aquaculture, said that while resources are recovering in developed countries, they're on the downside in developing countries. So the question I would have is, how do we reconcile the fact that there's a blame towards subsidies and its contribution towards depleted resources, and the fact that it's in developing countries that you have the issues? So that's one question. The second one is to do with how we see the role of the market with subsidies. So I know that the general, I guess, perception, or not perception, I'm sure it's been well researched, and I'm not an economist, I'm a biologist, by the way, but it's been researched that part of the driver for subsidies is the fact that there's a market. There's a market for fish. There's a market for unsustainable fish. But the market actually can be a tool. And the question I would have is also, how can the market? How do you see the role of the market? I, of course, will speak from the perspective of somebody who works with the Marine Stewardship Council, and we talk a lot about certification and eco-labeling. And I see the role of certification, for example, as a tool that provides the condition under which you may or decide to take those decisions to provide subsidies, i.e. you only get subsidies if you have been demonstrated to meet sustainable standards. But also the fact that certification can potentially be an indicator that a fishery is not overfished or has IUU and therefore is not suffering from the ill effects of subsidies. So I'll probably leave it there in the interest of time, but that's my sort of initial
I think you've made excellent points here, and thank you so very much. I think there were two very clear points in the questions here. One is about the implication of subsidies, presumably maybe in our part of the world here, where we are physically now, and its implications on the fisheries in the developing world, or perhaps the global nature of that. And plus the second one is, one of the good examples that you indicated is a transition from back to the good subsidy could be, possibly seeing certification as a prerequisite for getting subsidies. Is that a fair assessment of your point? Excellent points. Keep them on. Okay. Exactly. And now I would like to invite very quickly as well Michael Adams, who's the president of the Ocean Assets Institute, who just flown in from Geneva, I believe, to join us this evening. So it's really wonderful. Please, Michael.
Okay. This was a great presentation. Thank you very much. So I'll be a devil's advocate for once. Don't hate me for it.
No.
But I'm on a committee with one of Yemi's colleagues at the Climate Bonds Initiative, and we're helping formulate standards for corporate and government issuers of bonds in all the maritime sectors, including seafood, fishing. And when we looked at seafood, we saw, what the data that you have is fairly well known, that you've got 30 out of 35 billion are going to these large-scale fisheries. And we said, well, why is that? Are they really that stupid? And we're looking at the climate effects of financing the world's activities in this project. And the fact is the bigger boats are more fuel efficient. And as you pointed out, most of the component, larger majority of it is going towards fuel. So they're more fuel efficient. They're easier to deal with than 100 small boats, artisanal fisheries. They are able to access fisheries that are richer in productivity because the coastal fisheries have been depleted to a large extent. So there are a lot of advantages to investing, if you will, in the large-scale fisheries and the companies that are accessing them. So before that picture is going to change, you're going to have to deal with those realities. So that would be one question, how to answer those questions. Should I ask another one?
Please.
Okay. I'm just wondering, Rashid started to mention it, and I thought you would go into more detail other than the little cute rabbit story of like I've done before. But that's Rashid, he's very cool. I'm sorry, it's an interesting case study if you look at timber as another natural harvested resources versus fishing. And ultimately what you want to do with subsidies is get rid of them entirely, right? An industry, particularly one that has so much demand for fish, should be able to exist without them, harmful or beneficial, and it should be in the hands of the markets and private capital. In timber, you have now a 60-year track record of investment returns that are averaging 5%, and it's not correlated with inflation. Investors love this. It's in most institutional portfolios. They don't need, in most cases, subsidies, harmful or otherwise, anymore. It's an industry that's well capitalized, and the small holders, of course, got shaken out in that process. But it is an industry that's self-sustaining now, and certainly in most of the cases, including among the top 10 countries that are under our list there, the resource is harvested sustainably. So that could be a role model, a model of how the fishing industry would go, and I wonder if you looked at that as well.
Great. Thank you so very much, Michael. I think we have a set of some very clear questions. Some of them, or many of them, are thought-provoking, which is exactly what we need.
Yeah. No, this is cool.
So Rashid, if you could respond to them in however you want to respond, either, I mean, whichever one you want to respond first, and then hopefully afterwards, then we'll have more questions from the audience. Thank you, Rashid.
Yeah, so thank you for the questions and comments. It's really, really great. Having been asked, most of these have not been asked before, which is quite good, right? That's what I always look when I go to an audience. Will there be a question I haven't heard before? So that's good. So your first one is, I say subsidies are mostly paid by developed countries, and yet the fisheries in developed countries are in better shape than in the developing where subsidies are low. Okay, why is this? First point is that in general, management has something to say, right? So management in the developed world, by and large, is better than in the developing world. For example, you don't just go into Canadian waters or UK waters or even Chinese waters to fish illegally. You get blown away. I would even mention the US, right? So, but you can easily go into West African waters and do this. So the management is part of the reason. The second point, which I think is probably even more important, is that there's a lot of distant water fishing fleets that roam all over the world. And they get the subsidies in Japan, and before you know, they're in West Africa fishing. So you see the connection. In fact, that's one of the things that got me into these subsidies. The fact that the EU will buy fishing rights for EU boats to go to West Africa to fish. And those are subsidies because the government is paying for that. They should buy the right. So you have extra boats going out there. That's part of the reason they can do it. So the big subsidies in the developing world also fuel overfishing in the developing. Two key reasons. All right, the role of markets. Markets are definitely important. They have a role. I was actually on the stakeholder council of the Marine Stewardship Council years ago. And so, I mean, the theory is very clear. We can all participate because ultimately everything is driven by demand, right? So we decide each day, the little things we decide actually what accumulates at the market level. So yes, certification can have an impact. You know, if they are done well, and you know, you've been in this business for long, it's quite challenging, right? I mean, to satisfy and make sure the fishery is really sustainable. How do I know that? I don't know. And then you have all the fakery, right? In Canada, there was a study that showed how X% of the fish in the supermarket are claiming your certification that they are not, right? So you have all that. So but definitely it has a market. What I will recommend is don't give harmful subsidies and also satisfy your fishery. You know, I wouldn't say satisfy your fishery, therefore you get subsidies. No, I'll take both of them because that gets you closer to achieving sustainability. Now, the second, what's your name again? Your comment was very good, and you talked about the efficiency of the life scale, which is a real point. I mean, all the advantages you raise are true, right? But you didn't raise one disadvantage. Actually, you did. You did when you said the small-scale foresters. In your second question, they were clear, right? The small-scale foresters.
Well, they work for the big companies.
Yeah, they do, okay, which is debatable. If you tell my anthropology friends, they will go after you. You take people who have their own forests, take away and make them employees and pay them whatever you can. So anyway, there are the social aspects. In fact, in BC, one of the issues we found out, Andrea asked my master's student, she looked at concentration of fisheries because we have lots of ITQs in BC, which means you have concentration. And one person owns over 90% of the herring quota in BC.
British Columbia.
Yeah, I know the name. He's the richest guy in BC, right? Jim Patterson, very clever guy. He's good, he's hardworking, And it's also clever because once in a while he builds a nice building in the hospital and we all love him, right? Yeah, so he has the billions. Now, so you have that issue, and people are saying socially they don't think that is, it may be more efficient, but people don't really think it's a good. And one thing happened in Haida actually. So the concentration went to this company, and then they had one processing plant which was owned by the company, and 2 years ago they didn't think the returns were good enough. Maybe it's not up to 5%, 2%. So you know what? They shut down the factory, the processing plant, where a big chunk of the population depended on. So this was an uprising. It was a huge demonstration. So these are the kind of things. So to answer your question, what we need to do is what is the optimal size of large scale and small scales in order to balance all our societal needs, right? So because, yeah.
I think it's a very fundamental question, absolutely. In terms of the trade-off between efficiency and equity. You need social equity, but at the same time you need to be efficient. So how do you reconcile the two? How do you strike a balance between the two? Which is a very sort of critical question. On that note, I would like to invite the audience to ask questions. I've got a few hands already. So if you don't mind introducing yourselves before you ask a question as well, please. I see a hand there and then. Please.
Hi, my name is Adrian Gahan. I work with National Geographic, Christine Seas, with Henri.
Fantastic.
I have a question about the WTO process, so there's a harmful subsidies process happening at the WTO. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about that, if you're aware of it. And then also, the WTO is a soft legal process. It doesn't have a hard legal enforcement capacity like, for example, the European Court of Justice under the Common Fisheries Policy. So if there was an agreement at the WTO to phase out harmful subsidies for fishing, how would that in effect work, given what you say about distant water fleets and the externality is being dumped on people on the other sides of the world, or often on high seas, not even in areas of national jurisdiction. So it'd be interesting to hear a bit about how the harmful subsidies would actually be enforced.
Very clear question. Can we take on those questions? Yourself as well.
Yeah, Pernille Holtedal, Blue Mine Advisory. Two-part question. You talk about the beneficial subsidies, and you mentioned the plastics one. If you could just give a couple of other examples to give, so I understand sort of what you've included in that bucket. And then the other one is sort of looking into the future. Given, I was wondering what your thoughts were on, given the issues, the challenges with meat, the environmental disadvantages, climate change issues related to meat as a source of protein, the presumed growth in the future of consumption of fish to replace that. How do you see subsidies as potentially playing a role in that, in building an industry, if you will, or not?
Future.
Right. So, Rashid, if you don't mind responding to those questions.
That's a great question.
That's fantastic.
Should I go?
Please. Yeah.
Excellent again. The WTO process, I've been watching it. I'm not into that. I do the data and the analysis. I was there 2 weeks ago, if I get it right. I gave a talk to the delegates and ambassadors, and there seems to be an interest to do something, because they've promised the world since 2001, and it never happened. So they said they will get an agreement this time. I don't know whether they would, but that's the general atmosphere. But what
Sorry,
actually,
just for everyone's benefit, WTO referring
World
to
Trade
World
Organization.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
That's what the chair does, right? That's a good job. Thank you. So I see more interest. For example, Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific countries are really keen. They are getting a lot of data from us. I talked with a group called the Friends of Fish. Canada is included, the US, and other important groups. So they used to be Friends of Fishers, but I haven't heard of them this time around. You know, I gave a talk 2 years ago in the last process, and I said, I know in this room there are Friends of Fish and Friends of Fishers. But how can you ever be a friend of fishers? would have first been a friend of fish. It's crazy. That my model, zero fish means zero fishes, right? So maybe that they are gone now. They are gone now. We have friends of fish. So there are efforts going on. Maybe they might get an agreement, but the agreement may not be very much something that really affects, because they're going to water down the thing, right? And that's my fear. So not just will they get or not, they may get, but what would that do? And that goes to your second question about the WTO and its power to enforce this agreement. Actually, the reason the WTO got the job because it is the only, okay, apart from CITES, which is the Convention on Trade and Endangered Species, the WTO is the only one that has binding agreements, actually. And they have an arbitration system where you can take a country and actually arbitrate and give penalties. So that's one of the reasons they were given this job. So I don't think they are strong as the EU cause, but there is something there, so hopefully. And I think that is also why we are not getting the agreement. Because in the UN you can sign and you just go and not do it, but here if you do, somebody may check you. So, yeah. All right, what else? Examples of good subsidies, how to use them. The plastic one, yeah, that's actually where I think a lot of our thinking should zero in. I feel that at the moment our policymakers and managers are quite lazy. They just throw the money there and walk away. Think before you pass on taxpayer money. How can it really help people and also sustainability? And so, an example, there is a small village a town that I went to in Mexico. It was summertime, and what they did in that town, children come back from colleges and so on for summer school, they hire them. They hire them to join scientists and collect data. One of their mandates is actually to tell on people fishing, cheating, illegal fishing. And they pay them, that money goes into the family and helps, you know. So that's another thing, you can use fishers and fishing boats to help in data collection and getting involved in the management, rather than killing the fish, right? So, but I think we need more thinking. And that links to your future question. Here, we probably have to not just think of finding all the solutions within the fishing sector. I think we need to open up. There are ways to really, I was with the Africa group and they're saying, you know what, we also want to be able to fish in the high seas. I said, why do you want to do that? You cannot compete, forget it, right? So I think, say in Africa, the coastal towns in West Africa, how about talking about training? I mean, it's more medium term and long term, and yeah, sometimes that's what you need to do. You know, we need nurses, we need all sorts of people, right? And some say fishing is a way of life, which is true for some, but not for everybody. Yeah, so people will move, and I know this, right? I mean, you have your mom in West Africa who kills herself to give you education, and before you know you're somewhere. I wouldn't tell you where, but that's how you do it. So we need to really be less lazy and more ambitious, and to move people away. And when I say we, I'm not even talking about Guinea-Bissau, small country. I'm talking about the world. Then you tell me the way the world is looking now, what hope do I have? I still have a lot of hope. Things come and go. Some of these old guys will go and tell you. And there might be new opportunities. So.
Right. Thanks, Rashid. But since we are at IIED, and I can shamelessly promote ourselves here, just to give an example of a good subsidy from IIED's experience. So what we normally advocate for is, like any other country, there are always fishing regulations. For instance, you can impose no-take season, no-take zones, for instance, where fishers are not allowed to fish for 3 months, let's say, or 6 months, etc. But the question is, how do you enable these local communities cope with those fishing regulations? And one of the suggestions that we put forward is providing some sort of compensation scheme, some sort of subsidy to enable them to stay away from fishing activity for a few months or so, to enable successful storing and recruitment, etc. of the fish, and hopefully the fish stock will recover. But this is I would like to think, a good way of utilizing subsidies to help communities to cope with fishing regulations.
Especially when they get that bill from fishing,
Yeah.
they go to trade for something, they go learn something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just
right.
go
Yeah.
learn something, whatever it
Mm.
is, just enrich your endowment of knowledge,
Yeah.
and then who knows, you may not want to go back to fishing.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. So we'll take another set of questions. I see few hands here. So, goodness me, how do I do
Yes,
this now?
mate.
I need to be fair here. So maybe one question per person, clear, crisp, short question.
Yeah.
Right. I saw Simon, I saw Daniel, I saw Anne and John. Is that fair? Is there anyone else? Okay. Oh my goodness. So let's do this. Okay, so Simon, Daniela, Anne first, and then we take another set of questions. Is that okay?
That's good.
Rashid,
I
and quick response as well from
Yeah.
Rashid. Thank you.
Great.
So let's do that.
So very quickly, Simon Dent from the Sustainable Ocean Fund. And so while clearly there's a need for subsidies in small scale and for training, can we turn subsidies more to be investment? And where basically that can be more efficient, we can basically apply to the example over there, basically actually we can create an investment return by creating a no-take area over time. So instead of talking about subsidies, can we talk about more investment flow?
More investment.
So,
Yeah. I'm Daniela Russi from the Institute of European Environmental Policy. So I would welcome some reflection on the political side of things, because everybody knows that subsidies to a large scale fishery are bad for ecosystem in oceans, and collecting data on that is very useful for sure. But I think one of the key points is that large scale fleets and also the countries they belong to have more power in the international and national arena, so they won't be willing to accept the reduction in subsidies, and will have more power to impose that in policy. So my question is, how do you think synergies among less powerful actors can be created in order to influence policy processes and to create synergies between the needs of small-scale fishery and more vulnerable society and environmental sustainability?
thanks, Daniela. Good. Can I take Anne?
Hi, I am Anne from IIED, but I have a question from Ina Porras, who is a senior researcher here at IIED. She's based in Edinburgh, and she's been following along on Facebook. And she asks, a big challenge in proposing changes in subsidies is that powerful groups will not want to lose their financial privileges, as we've just heard actually. Evidence can be produced to show that they deserve these subsidies. What examples do you have of arguments that can be used to convince ministries of finance to change their mind?
Great. And now you have the challenge of responding to very important questions
Yeah,
in
very-
90 seconds or so.
Yeah, they're really interesting questions. So your point about investment, the more we can encourage investment thinking, the better, right? The more we can introduce the markets, the better. Right? But at the same time, I think taking out subsidies will actually help the investment. We have done modeling that shows that if you take out, and for European fisheries actually, we're talking about that. Well, if you take out the harmful subsidies, you improve the stock, and therefore the returns are higher, and that will then be more attractive to investors. So they go hand in hand. The thing about bad subsidies is just get them out if you can. But that goes to your question now. The politics is hard, and I know this is hard, and I don't have an answer for you straight away. But one of the things I've been thinking is actually to try to get people within countries, big subsidizing countries, to take this up, rather than the international community coming to tell them. So if locals actually accept and agree that this is not good for the system, I think that can start local dynamics, which can lead to action. You ask me, how do you do that, right? And you know that Adam Smith has actually talked about all of these things long before now. In 1780-something, he wrote a piece about herring fisheries in Scotland. And he said they were fishing for subsidies, not fish, not herring. Right? And so I was even thinking maybe we can do an Adam Smith Scholar or Adam Smith Fellows, program for some of the key countries, biologists, economists, managers coming together to say, the politicians, you've got to get them to do things. They don't do it because they love to. Right? So some of them do. I shouldn't generalize, but in general. So we have to make that happen. Otherwise, you're right. The powerful people will always get away. Yeah. What can I say? That connects to the question from the web, actually, in a nice way. You think so?
I'm nodding along, yeah, I agree.
Hopefully she'll be happy with that.
Okay, brilliant, excellent, thank you so very much. So here is, I think you will have to identify yourselves. So I've seen a few hands already. I can only give the opportunity for only one question. A question that you think, that this needs to be answered in this session now. If you are that person, please raise your hand. Okay, you are that person, great. So please do, please don't take offense. We'll be going upstairs with cold and hot beverage, whatever that means. And we can also talk to Rashid and ask him questions and talk to each other. Fantastic. Please introduce yourself. Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm sorry for being so forward. I'll give some false name. My name is Jeff Ardron, and I lead the Commonwealth Blue Charter Initiative at the Commonwealth Secretariat. And this isn't the question I was originally going to ask you, Rashid, but since you asked for the summing up, Rashid and I have known each other a number of years. We're both Canadians, and things are really different now than they were when I first met you and when we were in this game together, but back in the dark ages. Yeah. So I want to end on that note and ask you, how have you seen in the last couple of years things changing, and give us some hope that there is hope here, that finally this silly situation that you've been talking about for several years is changing?
Yeah. Should I go?
Please,
yeah.
Please.
So essentially, Jeff is talking about the change of government that we had 2 years ago, right?
Sure, and just in the world generally.
Yeah, in the world generally. So starting from Canada, right? Because we have this Harper government, which is quite anti-conservation, fired a lot of government scientists, and it was really gloomy. Scientists couldn't talk to the journalists and so on. This is in Canada, huh? So that was surprising. And then there was a real red wave, we say in Canada, not blue wave. There was the Canadians were fed up, and we just swept the government out, and we got Trudeau to come in. And clearly the government is more positive to the environment. They are far from perfect because the political plays are still there. Oil and gas, for example, you see they're lacking because of the big powers. So that was quite a shift. It's like day and night. And that is why I say we are hopeful. Things always do change. That's the beauty of the world, right? Otherwise, we will not be here. Right? So things can change. And in respect to the ocean, a lot has changed. My God. Fish, who cared about fish in the ocean just 10 years ago? And now everybody is talking about, everybody, I'm exaggerating, but lots of people are talking about fish, and then the meetings and the efforts, and Prince Charles was out of this. If I had time, I will show you a picture of me and him shaking hands. He actually quoted our number, you can't believe it. He invited us to the palace and he said, some scientists in this room have estimated that we spent $20 billion of our own money killing the fish. So go, Prince. Yeah. So you have a lot of people getting into action, and that gives us hope. Young people, there are lots of young people in this room, and that again is a good thing. Yeah. Let's keep the hope on, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, fantastic. Thank you so very much, Rashid. I think this session has been extremely interesting, at least for me, in terms of the learning aspect of it as well, of course. I think it certainly strengthened my belief that this is a highly important and a very timely topic that we need to exhaust ourselves to resolve this very critical challenge that we're facing in the ocean space, which is the harmful subsidies to be in particular. But I guess there is, as we can see from the question that was asked, some, of course, the obvious expected questions and some very unexpected and challenging questions, of course. But I guess there are a few issues that we could probably take home and think more about. presumably including, for instance, the trade-off between equity and efficiency, for instance, and how do you reconcile the two? Economically speaking, that may make financial sense to some, but is that socially equitable, for instance, or something that may make sense from an ecological point of view, but not necessarily so from the societal or distributional point of view. So these sort of trade-offs between efficiency and equity, and if you like, if to add to the mix, legitimacy issue, etc., are highly sort of important issues that need to be discussed if we were to call for a reform in the way we design our subsidies and other fiscal policies, which again links to, I think, the point that Diana partly mentioned about the political economy as well. So, it begs the question: how do we go beyond discussing the net public benefit and net private benefits, but also talk about the net political gain or benefit as well? Because I think that's the missing variable in our equation. I think that's not being able for us to drive these policy changes home. And sorry, not terribly optimistic concluding line, but I would like us to leave this room with this very fundamental question, to go back to the first point I made about the Sustainable Development Goals, which calls on member states of the United Nations to end harmful subsidies by 2020. No, by 2020, about 13, 14, 15 months down the line, we will have to have ended harmful subsidies. Is that possible? If not, what's our role in at least catalyzing that change, hopefully? I think I will leave you with that, but for the rest, if you find an answer for that, please do get back to me. Then now I think we will have to go upstairs for some networking session and very, very relaxed, very informal drinks and food, etc. And
remind you to talk about soul share.
yes, so I was just going to say, yeah, I'm sorry, I just have to admit that I cannot read from scripts, so I've just kind of asked Rosalind to read out what exactly to expect upstairs.
Yes, so we've got wine and so on upstairs, but also we've got canapes which showcase sustainable sea produce, including fish from responsible sources, but also some forage sea vegetables and seaweed. So the fish has come from Soul Share, which is London's first community-supported fishery, and they have a fish box scheme and deliver sustainable and ethically caught fish from UK fishermen and fisherwomen who use low-impact methods. So do enjoy, appreciate that, and take the opportunity, I'm sure, after Rashid has had a drink himself, to ask him many more questions. Thank you very much.
You can join me in
yes.